There once was a young man by the name of Daniel. I like that name, so I use it. And Daniel, he was well enough off. He had food, he had a house. The only thing he was lacking was a family. But he had enough, and he was pleasantly happy. And one day, as he was walking along, headed off to work, he heard a strange noise. It sounded very far away. It sounded like, woo, woo. Now, Daniel didn't like to hear people in distress. So he started to follow the sound and look for it, and he came to a river. And inside the river, he saw that a tree had fallen and was lying across the river. And as he looked, inside of the branches of the tree was tangled a little man. A very small man with a red beard, and red suspenders, and a little green vest. And he was being pushed under the water as the tree bounced up and down. Every time he came up, he'd take a breath and yell, "Help!" And then he'd go under the water again. And Daniel feared for the little man. And he dove into the water, and he waded out into the tree, and he grabbed the tree, and he lifted the little man out of the water, and he carried him to the shore, and he laid him down. The little man was spewing water out of his mouth, so he picked up his little legs and got the water out. And the little man was grateful, but he was very cold. And so Daniel reached into his back pocket, because he only had waded up to his knees, and he pulled out his handkerchief, and he wrapped his red handkerchief. He hadn't blown his nose in it yet. And he wrapped his handkerchief around the little man and got him warm, and he took him home, and he placed him by the fire. As the little man warmed up, he was very grateful. And he said, oh, Daniel, you saved me life. And that is something that we little people, we never forget. And as a leprechaun, I have lots of gold. And I wish to give you all of my gold for saving my life. And Daniel said, no, thank you. I have everything I need. I don't need your gold. You go ahead and keep it. Well, this surprised the leprechaun tremendously. Nobody had ever turned down leprechaun gold before. But Daniel refused to take it. And after the little man was warmed and they hung his clothes up by the fire and they were all dry and he got back dressed, Daniel took him to the door and let him go. And once again, the leprechaun offered him his gold. And Daniel once again said, no, thank you. I have enough. Well, the next morning, Daniel went out the door, and sitting on the doorstep was a pot of gold. Just sitting there on the doorstep. And Daniel said, I told that leprechaun I did not need his gold. And he picked up that pot of gold and he carried it to the fairy ring. And he put it in the fairy ring and left it there. Well, the next day, as he got his clothes on, he reached into his pockets. And there was a gold coin in each pocket. And as he dug through, he found more and more gold coins. And he was a little angry. He said, I told the little man, no, thank you. And he took the gold and he spread it into the fairy ring, right next to the pot of gold. Well, amazingly enough, the next morning, as he woke up, he went to wash his face, and sitting in the basin instead of water was a little bag of gold. He said, I told that leprechaun, no, thank you. And he took that gold and he placed it in the fairy ring. And before long, the fairy ring was so full of gold, it was a mound. And still, Daniel kept finding little pieces of gold everywhere he went. Until finally, he had piled so much gold in the fairy ring that he thought the little man had given up. And Daniel was finally happy for himself. Well, that's not. Daniel heard a strange noise coming from his barn. And as he ran out, he noticed that the barn door was open. And he closed it. And he ran inside. And his cow Bessie was gone. The beautiful brown Bessie that gave so much milk with the long eyelashes, she was gone. And he knew he closed her stall and closed the barn door. And he sensed foul play. So off he went. He grabbed the rope to lead her back home, and he followed her out. And he looked on the ground and found footprints and followed her footprints into the forest. But it got later and later in the evening, and he hadn't found her. And it got later and later in the evening, and he hadn't found her, and he began to worry, because the footprints were getting into the deep part of the forest, and he was losing them. Well, he was concerned now, because he followed her so far out, he wasn't going to be able to make it back to go to bed. And he thought, well, maybe if I just lay down here in this thicket, in the morning I'll be able to follow her some more. And as he went to lay down, a stick from the tree grabbed his beard and turned his head. And through the trees he saw a light. And he followed the light, and he found that it belonged to a small shack. And he recognized the shack as the widow Harris. And he went to knock on the door, because maybe the widow would let him stay there the night. But the widow did not open the door. Instead, it was a young, beautiful girl. She had long, blonde hair that curled in the back. And she looked at the man and she said, "Oh, you must own that beautiful brown cow that wandered into my barn earlier today." He said, "Yes, I am. And who are you?" He said, "Oh, the widow Harris was beginning to get old, and so she sent for me, and I came to take care of her. But not that long ago, the widow Harris died, and I've been here alone since." Well, Daniel, he was concerned for the girl. She seemed all alone out here in the woods. And he went inside, and she gave him a drink, and he was able to warm up and get ready. But he noticed that the roof was leaking. And he asked why was the roof leaking. She said, "Because I can't get up and rethatch it." And Daniel said, "If you let me stay the night, I'll rethatch your roof for you in the morning." She said, "Oh, that would be wonderful." And he spent the night in the barn next to the cow. And the next morning, before she got up, he went up on the roof and started rethatching. And when she got up, she went up to help him. And together they made a beautiful new roof on that house that was so watertight that nothing could get through. But more importantly, before the end of the day, Daniel had fallen in love with that lass. And what makes the story happy, she had fallen in love with him, and he asked her to marry him. And she said yes. And they got married. And it was a wonderful thing. And he brought her to his house, and they combined everything they had together, and they shared a beautiful life. And not a week after they were married, Daniel went into the barn to check the cow. And as he walked in, he heard a little voice say, "Are you happy now?" And he said, "Yes, I am." And he looked, and there was the leprechaun sitting on the windowsill. And the leprechaun said, "There, I promised you me gold, and I gave it to you." Daniel said, "I never took any of your gold. I gave it all back." The leprechaun smiled and said, "But your wee wife has the hair the color of gold and a heart to match. There are more riches in the world than gold coins, my friend, and I have repaid my debt to you." And Daniel was happy that he had. Thank you for letting me tell you the story.